We continue Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough, by starting with Tiberius Gracchus. Having completed the first two narratives, we now may proceed to take a view of misfortunes, not less remarkable in the Roman couple, and, with the lives of Agis and Cleomenes, compare these of Tiberius and Caius. They were the sons of Tiberius Gracchus, who, though he had been once censor, twice consul, and twice had triumphed, yet was more renowned and esteemed for his virtue than his honors. Upon this account, after the death of Scipio, who overthrew Hannibal, he was thought worthy to match with his daughter Cornelia, though there had been no friendship or familiarity between Scipio and him, but rather the contrary. There is a story that he once found in his bedchamber a couple of snakes, and that the soothsayers, being consulted concerning the prodigy, advised that he should neither kill them both nor let them both escape, adding that if the male serpent was killed, Tiberius should die, and if the female, Cornelia, and that therefore Tiberius, who extremely loved his wife, and thought, besides, that it was much more his part, who was an old man, to die than it was hers, who as yet was but a young woman, killed the male serpent, and let the female serpent escape, and soon after himself died, leaving behind him 12 children born to him by Cornelia. And one of the things that if you have faith in an outcome of an oracle interpretation, or perhaps the sympathetic magic attachment to a certain matter, it can definitely increase certain results as being, the likelihood of certain results. But yeah, certain results would be increased. Not that it's, once you decide that this is going to happen, it's going to happen. No, it's just some factors may be opened up by your belief towards that thing. That's why it's important to be careful who you tell your dreams to. And when I share something on the channel, I've already had interpretation of it, so that the first interpretation isn't some random person that has said something. But Cornelia, taking upon herself all the care of the household and the education of her children, approved herself so discreet a matron, so affectionate a mother, and so constant and noble-spirited a widow, that Tiberius seemed to all men to have done nothing unreasonable in choosing to die for such a woman, who, when King Ptolemy himself proffered her his crown, and would have married her, refused it, and chose rather to live a widow. In this state she continued, and lost all her children, except one daughter, who was married to Scipio the younger, and 2 sons, Tiberius and Caius, whose lives we are now writing. These she brought up with such care, that though they were without dispute in natural endowments and dispositions, the first among the Romans of their time, yet they seemed to owe their virtue even more to their education than to their birth, and as in the statues and pictures made of Castor and Pollux, though the brothers resemble one another, yet there is a difference to be perceived in their countenances between the one who delighted in the cestus and the other who was famous in the course. So between these two noble youths, though there was a strong general likeness in their common love of fortitude and temperance, in their liberality, their eloquence, and their greatness of mind, yet in their actions and administration of public affairs a considerable variation showed itself. It will not be amiss, before we proceed, to mark the difference between them. Tiberius, in the form and expression of his countenance, and in his gesture and motion, was gentle and composed, but Caius earnest and vehement. And so in their public speeches to the people, the one spoke in a quiet, orderly manner, standing throughout on the same spot. The other would walk about on the hustings, and in the heat of the orations pull his gown over his shoulders, and was the first of all the Romans that used such gestures, as Cleon is said to have been the first orator among the Athenians that pulled off his cloak and smote his thigh when addressing the people. Caius, his oratory, was impetuous and passionate, making everything tell to the utmost, whereas Tiberius was gentle and persuasive, awakening emotions of pity. His diction was pure and carefully correct, while that of Caius was vehement and rich. So likewise in their way of living and at their tables. Tiberius was frugal and plain. Caius, compared with other men, temperate and even austere, but contrasting with his brother in a fondness for new fashions and rarities. It appears Drusus's charge against him that he had brought some silver dolphins to the value of 1,250 drachmas for every pound weight. The same difference that appeared in their diction was observable also in their tempers. The one was mild and reasonable, the other rough and passionate, and to that degree that often in the midst of speaking he was so hurried away by his passion against his judgment that his voice lost its tone, and he began to pass into mere abusive talking, spoiling his whole speech. As a remedy to this excess, he made use of an ingenious servant of his, one Licinius, who stood constantly behind him with a sort of pitch-pipe or instrument to regulate the voice by, and whenever he perceived his master's tone alter and break with anger, he struck a soft note with his pipe, on hearing which Caius immediately checked the vehemence of his passion, and his voice grew quieter, and allowed himself to be recalled to temper. Such are the differences between the two brothers, but their valor in war against their country's enemies, their justice in the government of its subjects, their care and industry in office, and their self-command in all that regarded their pleasures, were equally remarkable in both. Tiberius was the elder by 9 years, owing to which their actions as public men were divided by the difference of the times in which those of the one and those of the other were performed, and one of the principal causes of the failure of their enterprises was this interval between their careers, and the want of combination of their efforts. The power they would have exercised, and they flourished both together, could scarcely have failed to overcome all resistance. We must therefore give an account of each of them singly, and first of the eldest. Tiberius, immediately on his attaining manhood, had such a reputation that he was admitted into the college of the augurs, and that in consideration more of his early virtue than of his noble birth. Yeah, that's what you do with things, right? Like, was it the last program that we did of this, talking about the women were equal, the women could make the most of what they had in their opportunity and be valorous and all that. This appeared by what Appius Claudius did, who thought he'd been consul and censor, and was now the head of the Roman Senate, and had the highest sense of his own place and merit. At a public feast of the augurs, addressed himself openly to Tiberius, and with great expressions of kindness offered him his daughter in marriage. And when Tiberius gladly accepted, and the agreement had thus been completed, Appius, returning home, no sooner had reached his door, but he called to his wife and cried out in a loud voice, "O Antistia, I've contracted our daughter Claudia to a husband." She, being amazed, answered, "But why so suddenly, or what means this haste, unless you have provided?" Tiberius, Gracchus for her husband. I'm not ignorant that some apply this story to Tiberius, the father of Gracchi, and Scipio Africanus, but most related as we have done. Well, what if there's a similar story, right? And Polybius writes that after the death of Scipio Africanus, the nearest relation of Cornelia, preferring Tiberius to other competitors, gave her to him in marriage, and not having been engaged or promised to anyone by her father. This young Tiberius, accordingly, serving in Africa under the younger Scipio, who had married his sister and living there under the same tent with him. Yeah, don't, whether it's legal or not, don't do that. The with one's sibling stuff. Soon learned to estimate the noble spirit of his commander, which is so fit to inspire strong feelings of emulation and virtue, and desire to prove merit in action, and in a short time he excelled all the young men of the army in obedience and courage, till he was the first that mounted